warm welcome to everybody. I am Shrija Agrawal, and you are watching the Mint special on Future of Infrastructure Investments. This is our first dispatch today. And setting up the context, we have a very meaningful panel. But before we get on to this, it's very important to understand what really are we talking about here. Infrastructure is the backbone of economic activity, and India needs to continuously invest in creating and upgrading its physical and digital infrastructure to achieve its economic goals. It is estimated that India requires close to $200 billion of capital for infrastructure sector every year. This is twice our current allocation, that is about 80 to 90 billion dollars. So the question is, how do we mobilize more capital in infrastructure space? In addition to this, banks are reeling under high value NPAs from infrastructure sectors which are not keen to lend. Hence, we need to tap in the other 54% source of capital, insurance funds, pension funds, and other pooled vehicles such as mutual funds. However, these sources of capital require better structures and routes to invest in infrastructure. Could InvITs be the answer? We have a very meaningful panel today, and we would decode some of these questions to find the relevant answers. Please help me welcome Harsh Raj, Chief Executive Officer at IndiGrid, Sachin Gupta, Senior Director at CRISIL, and Nilesh Rao, Managing Director at Kotak Mahindra Asset Management Company Limited. Gentlemen, thank you for joining. It's my sheer pleasure and privilege to be hosting you for this. Harsh, my first question to you, and just sort of beginning with the basics for the better of our readers and watchers here, how would you describe an InvIT? And I pose this question to you from a practitioner's point of view. I mean, what really is the difference between an InvIT and an IPO, and why are they relevant in today's context?
Sure. Thank you, Shrija, and thanks for HT Mint for having us on the panel today. InvITs are, I would describe in a simple way, are no different than a better governed company in an avatar of a mutual fund manner. Why I say so is that they are formed as a trust, like a mutual fund, controlled by investment manager, like a mutual fund, but do not own listed security, own securities and shares of the infrastructure assets in a very, very focused manner. So I would describe that in a simpler way. Why they are like a listed company with better corporate governance standards is because the unit holder rights are far superior to that in any listed companies. So whether it's increasing leverage beyond the point, acquisition of new assets, change of economics, change of business, all of it requires approval of unit holders, and in most of the times without the original sponsors or promoters voting for it. So it provides a higher corporate governance standard. Besides that, SEBI has framed the regulations keeping in mind a lot of successes across the world and ensured that in India, when they started in 2017, it resulted in a resounding success. They started with only operating assets. So 90% of the asset needs to be operating assets in InvIT, which removes most of the infrastructure risk that India has faced till now in the past. So no under construction risk, no financing risk, no clearance risk, no development risk. So that de-risks the assets materially. Second, mandatory payout ratio. So whatever the infrastructure assets that InvITs own, 90% of that is required to be distributed to its investors at least semi-annually. Most of us do quarterly, but the regulations require us to do minimum semi-annually. Third, the leverage is capped. Consolidated leverage is capped. I would say no other company in India or any other platform has got such capped leverage that you cannot lever beyond a 49 to 70% consolidated leverage. So whatever Indian infrastructure sector faced from 2005 till 2015 in terms of investor not having a great experience, leverage, corporate governance, and mandatory distributions from operating projects, all of it were resolved in the regulations. So that's why I call it's a listed platform with better corporate governance.
That's sort of beautifully put, But tell me about the mechanics of InvIT, Harsh, if you will, I mean, there are various entities involved, one understands, investment managers, sponsors. Can you perhaps demystify them in like a very simple language? So what would those really be?
Sure. So I would again take an example of mutual fund over here so that people understand mutual fund better. The InvIT itself is a trust, like a mutual fund. So it's a mutual fund in legal sense. The companies who run it are the AMCs. So I represent the AMC, the manager for our InvIT. So manager is the most important element in the InvIT as a business, just like a mutual fund, because managers make all the decisions with respect to investment, disinvestment, operations, capex, acquisitions, all of it. The second most important aspect, which is slightly different than the companies, is the trustee. Again, similar to manager, the trustee's role is important to ensure that the business of the InvITs is done in accordance with the SEBI regulations, and at every step, manager has followed them, and the governance is kept in check. There's an independent company which does that, the trusteeship, which cannot be an affiliate of either the InvIT or the manager. The third important person in this business is the sponsor, who starts the InvIT with the first set of assets to be almost in way of starting the asset. And that is the most important role of the sponsor, to start the InvIT and launch the IPO. But after that, the role of the sponsor reduces, and the role of the manager as running the InvIT becomes the most important one. So these are the three most important stakeholders: the trustee, the manager, and the sponsor.
Sachin, I sort of come to you now. We heard from Harsh essentially laying down, the basics, for InvIT, trying to understand the mechanics also, from practitioner's point of view. If you take a sort of step back and give a sort of more macro view on this, one understand that perhaps asset allocation is the key when we're investing in InvITs. So what is the kind of investors do you think are more relevant for an asset class like this? Give us some sense and color there.
Right. Thanks, Shrija, and thanks for inviting me on this panel. I think we must understand that InvIT is actually a customized instrument that has been actually it has come into being largely because of the problem of infrastructure financing. So it's a designed kind of a thing. Globally, it's known under the name of REITs because they will have multiple asset classes. In India, we have kept it for simplicity REIT, which is only in real estate, and InvITs, which are only in infrastructure investments. Till now, we have seen assets which are roads and power transmission, which have happened in terms of the public InvITs. In private InvITs, we've had other asset classes like pipeline, telecom, and again, REITs have also been there. One of them which has been public, and that is for commercial real estate. Now, the thing is that the key thing here that we have to understand is that the underlying assets are all operational infrastructure assets. And the reason why they have kind of been structured to be only operational infrastructure asset is so that the risk is minimal. And the kind of investors who can invest in these assets are long-term yield-seeking investors who are happy with, maybe a return which is little higher than the FD, but they do not want to take a risk which is generally associated with an equity exposure. So while in nature of the instrument, it is an equity exposure because you are owning some share of those assets which Harsh spoke of, or say road asset or transmission asset. You are effectively an owner. But because the underlying assets have long-term concessions, with say NHAI or Power Grid, or it could be any strong counterparty, which allow, and the contracts are very strong, which allows it for the next 15, 20 years, there will be a very steady cash flow stream. And the investors who are really investing, the end investors who will be investing in this, will essentially get a 90% kind of a free cash flow from there. So really coming to what kind of investors, we are looking at a yield-seeking, relatively risk-averse kind of an investor who's looking at some kind of a delta over the regular kind of debt instruments that he can get. And because the concessions are with stable, strong counterparties generally, there is a fair bit of stability, and that is what kind of makes it work. And as we go forward, I mean, the asset classes will evolve, right? I mean, till now we are going into relatively low risk asset classes. The InvITs are rated at a very high level, but as the market gets more comfortable, they could be assets in, say, renewable energy, sectors where again they have long concession agreements. There are stable cash flows, but then these could kind of be the future asset classes that can come.
He said that perhaps it is more suited for investors which are more long-term yield-seeking and more risk-averse. Would you want to add to that? It's what is it relevant for which type of investor?
So InvIT and REIT structures are for those investors who are looking at longer term investment horizon. In the Indian context, we have seen debt kind of return promising InvIT, as well as equity kind of return promising InvIT. Obviously, they are not pure debt or pure equity, but bit hybrid, but the color of debt is higher on one side and color of equity is higher on the other side. Now, in any new instrument, the first experience has to be good. Unfortunately, in India's case, we started journey on the wrong foot. The first ever InvIT which was issued through public issue has generated negative return for investors till today. That created a sour taste for investors, and effectively subsequent InvITs which came, they had to carry the legacy of that burden and remove it with their performance. Fortunately, subsequent experience have been fairly positive. They have given pretty attractive return to investors. And
Sure.
in today's market, far better than equity returns and debt returns as well.
I can already see Harsh smiling when you said all this.
Because his company has carried the burden and provided better return to investors. But on a serious note, as an investor, what we actually need is rule of law. It's not linked to a particular infrastructure project, but it is linked to how infrastructure projects are managed and contracts are enforced in our country. For example, we had invested in a road project where NHI annuity were supposed to come. Now, this could easily be converted into InvIT because you know NHI annuity is coming, it's government risk, and you discount it and put it into InvIT structure. Now, in this particular case, the company which was supposed to maintain the road didn't maintain the road. That pushed NHI to delay the annuity. And suddenly the cash flow which you were expecting goes haywire. Now the underlying value of the road suffered. The value of instrument based on that annuity also suffered. And while these are all publicly disclosed facts, but they are all in fine prints. And when one is investing, one does look into all these things, but one assumes that things will be normal. Now, it should be possible for investors to change the road contractor and employ someone who will maintain the road and ensure that annuity flows. But in India, it's not easily possible to change the contractor or owner of the road, even though your annuity is not coming to you. This is where role of sponsor becomes very, very important. They have to ensure that the underlying assets remain appropriate. It continues to function so that cash flow can continue to move to investors. There are some sponsors which have taken this job very nicely, and I believe investors are investing with them based on their reputation rather than the agreement. Now, if you want to popularize InvIT, contracts should be enforceable in letter as well as in spirit. If not, then this instrument remains accessible to that set of promoters whose governance, whose business practices market feels comfortable with.
You were saying something, Sachin. Yeah, you want to add?
I would agree with Nilesh, and just the point I would say is that the fact that now there is a possibility that the sponsor need not be really the only person who can kind of manage the asset, because as his equity goes down and there are other institutional investors or institutional players, vis-a-vis someone and a sponsor who was owning the asset 100% versus now say maybe when the sponsor is owning maybe only 25%, the likelihood of say a better governance and of maintenance is actually there, is more likely than if the asset was fully owned by a sponsor. So to some extent, what I would say is that it's actually the InvIT which will allow infrastructure assets to be able to work more effectively if they are in a more of a third party investor driven kind of a structure instead of a sponsor driven structure, and that is where InvIT kind of works out. But on the other point, what Nilesh said, it's completely true that the underlying contracts is really the bone of this, and that is true for entire infrastructure. If the counterparties and the contracts are kind of going a little weak, then honestly nothing can save them. So the whole bedrock would be the contract and the counterparty.
So that sort of forms a beautiful segue to my next question, that, how do you distinguish between two InvITs? I think you and Nilesh touched upon the fact that it's perhaps the sponsor, looking at the sponsor, corporate governance standards, and underlying infrastructure assets. But can you care to sort of expand further on this, like from a retail investor's perspective, but not necessarily so sophisticated? What are the 3 or 4 key areas one has to look at, investing in one InvIT vis-a-vis the other? What would those really be?
What I would say is that we must understand, as any equity investor, what is the underlying business of that InvIT. So what are the kind of concessions it has, whether it's a road or a transmission or a renewable, and then we have to be comfortable with that business. That is one. Second is the business model, whether it's a risk-free kind of an annuity model wherein the only risk really that you're carrying is the counterparty, which could be a central government, which could be a state government, which could be a private party. So that is also very critical. That will help you understand the risk better. If it's a state government entity versus central government, obviously, entities like NHAI, Power Grid will give more comfort as in terms of the longevity and the stability of the cash flows. So business risk as measured by the type of business that you have, and the business model as measured by the counterparties and the nature, whether it is toll, whether it is annuity. And thirdly, I would say the corporate governance, and that's I would say the most important but the most nebulous of the 3, because it's very difficult to kind of put a number and objectify that. But I think that is extremely important, because while I did say that the sponsor's role is minimized and the whole governance structure is there to kind of give more power to the investment manager and the trustees to really manage the whole InvIT. But I think in the Indian context, we cannot overemphasize the importance of the sponsor. So that I think would be the 3 key things. The 4th thing, which I feel at some level, even the InvIT sponsors or the InvITs per se have not been able to educate the market in the right way, is how do they, if I'm an investor, what should I expect? They only talk about typically say a 12% distribution or, something like that. But people don't really easily understand a basic thing, that in an InvIT, there is no residual value. A lot of times, if there is at least for the concessions that you have today, say someone has 10 road assets or 10 transmission assets, whatever, those it's only cash flows for those 15, 20 years that the concession runs. There is no residual value, which normally everyone expects the residual value to be there, in an FD or any other this thing. So valuing an InvIT is a bit more challenging than simple, generally we look at a going concern, we have ratios, price earnings multiple and all those. Here it's more complicated. You need to actually see the cash flows, then take your calls, project. So somewhere maybe the InvITs need to kind of educate the market in terms of the benchmarks, how they should look at it when the risk is going up, risk is going down.
Even I would want to understand from you that what really are the yield range that investors can expect in InvITs?
Yeah. So I think Sachin captured the key criteria or other filters which investors should look at when choosing the investment, especially for InvITs, because they are focused on infrastructure assets and the underlying business is the most important. To compare a 2 InvIT with owning different businesses is a complete mistake. Compare the same business, whether in the equity, listed or an InvIT, is probably more appropriate versus comparing 2 InvITs which in different businesses. The point that Sachin mentioned is exactly the point. There needs to be more education. There are already in a listed InvITs a lot more disclosures. Now it's a matter of time about how do we explain and how do we make people understand the business beyond what is disclosed. Is the journey which all InvITs need to do it together to explain more so that investors appreciate them more. I think one unique part about InvITs, I would say, which is slightly contrary, is that they are very focused. So typically in a listed company where there is a confusion of how do I value a milk business to a generation business to a transmission business put together, in an InvIT one gets a better evaluation of how can I value this business in a relative sense. And I think, but as Sachin also mentioned, these are largely cash flow based valuation. Yes, there are probably road concessions don't have terminal values. Transmission do because they are perpetual. Even after that, one needs to be able to see and discount the cash flows of 25, 35, 40 years. And I think that level of sophistication needs to spread two ways. One, there are already disclosure norms. For example, SEBI recently increased that if you're living beyond 49%, you need to disclose your valuation reports quarterly, which discloses your 35 years of full life of cash flows. So that can be one mode. And the second one is track record. Because to be honest, I don't believe every single investor in the country is going to do the DCF and figure that out. But what is important is that a track record is built by different InvITs in terms of distribution, performance, so that people can rely on both management and their commitment and forecasting, right? So I think it's a mix of both track record plus higher disclosure, which would probably help.
Nilesh, you sort of want to add to that, you are really at the heart of it in the capital market space, that what should really investors evaluate or watch out while investing in InvIT? We spoke about sort of various parameters here, looking between two InvITs, what should one look at? We spoke about corporate governance, underlying business model, sponsors, their background. Anything in particular that you would want to add? I'm also keen to understand if there's a pecking order within the infrastructure asset class, that road yields higher, transmission yields higher, toll yields higher, if there is at all.
So one, apart from what Harsh and Sachin mentioned, let's understand that InvIT is a complicated instrument compared to a simple debt instrument. It is more towards equity where you'll have to do research. Just reading a simple recommendation or hearing on television, you can't decide to invest in InvIT. You must gain appropriate knowledge about the underlying assets, the structure, the sponsor, and the contract by reading the offer document. Number two, when you're investing, you'll have to figure out, are you investing in that kind of InvIT where risk and returns will be limited? Or are you looking for equity kind of InvIT where risk and return both will be higher? Now, most investors want return like equity and risk like debt. That structure does not exist. So the disappointment occurs because your expectations were wrong, not because the performance is wrong. So please set your expectations appropriately, looking at the structure and the details. One careful evaluation which someone has to do, and let's put it in the context of REIT today. Now, the contracted rentals of, let's say, pre-COVID period will be substantially higher than contracted rentals in post-COVID period. This is well-known fact. Now, if you are going to capitalize based on pre-COVID-19 rates, you are going to get a different value. And if someone does an issuance on that inflated value, maybe you will get current yield for a while till such time earlier rental agreements continue. But thereafter, you are going to see substantially lower rental yield and potentially lower capital value as well. Now, when you are looking to evaluate REIT today, there's no point in looking at just the past agreements. You also need to look at what is the future performance. So one, be mentally prepared that REIT InvIT is a complex instrument. It will require effort on an investor's side to understand terms, contracts, risks, and one will have to take a call looking at the future rather than just the past.
So that's a sort of piece of advice coming in, looking at the future and not necessarily looking at the past. So I want to sort of also understand from you, Nilesh, and then get to sort of the panel here. What is, in your view, what will become more popular going forward? Publicly listed InvITs or sort of more private-like structures? What is your sense there?
So essentially, if you look at InvIT issuer, he will go where his cost will be minimum. Now, if public market can provide that, well and good. If not, private market. And today, if we see the cost of doing an issuance in public market is fairly higher compared to private market. How do we ensure that the cost of doing issuance of InvIT REIT in public market is bare minimum? That will make it competitive to private market. Second, time taken to place an asset in public market vis-a-vis private market. I think by and large, private market will score significantly higher. How do we reduce the time to market in public market will also determine what kind of assets can come into public market. The third thing between public and private will be probably quantum. Now, in private market, the negotiations could become favor of investor because you are negotiating probably with one, two, or few investors. In the public market, you will have little bit of control in your side and issuer side. As long as you price it reasonably, the investors collectively will not have that large bargaining power. So somewhere between your bargaining position, your time taken to market, and your cost of market, this will determine whether one should go for private or whether one should go for public market. We as mutual fund investors are open to both. I can do a private placement deal. I can do a public market investment. But the challenge then is that in many a times in public market, if you don't price it correctly, and it's a bit tilted in favor of investors, you end up receiving far more subscription. And then the investors don't necessarily get the meaningful allotment, which will make them a long-term investor in the InvIT. So there are no right or wrong answer as to whether one should go private or one should go public. Each investor has to do their dharma. Each issuer has to do their dharma. Issuer will choose which is least costly. Investor will choose which is most remunerative.
Let's hear from the practitioner himself now. We have Harsh sitting here. So what can we really do to bring more publicly listed InvITs into the markets? Why is it that we don't really have much of them? We have you and IRB for sure. What really can we do to sort of get more momentum in that direction?
Sure. So I think I agree to Nilesh's point of view, beautifully captured in terms of cost of issuance. And I firmly believe that both will coexist, both public and private. We've seen in an equity market as well, right? There is a vibrant equity market and there is a vibrant private equity market. Both coexist because both addresses a different need of capital. Even in InvIT, it will remain the same. Better names with better governance structure, with more robust organization would have a lower cost of public market issuances and therefore would go for public market. And slightly more complex businesses with slightly premature projects would go for private placement kind of issues. We believe even private placement in a 3 to 5 years of operation, they would look to come back to the public market. So effectively, over a 10-year period, development of public market is the key for infrastructure financing for as a country as a whole. What can be done and why there are only 2 listed market investments? There are a few factors to that. Factor number 1, which Nilesh captured, the first issue did create a bit of, I would say, a setback for the market per se. Believe that's changing now. A lot of investors are looking and buying in public market and becoming active. However, the first couple of years were lost there. Second, I would say the last 3 years have been quite volatile for infrastructure and economy per se, right? In IL&FS and subsequent crises. So most of the amount of public issuances itself has gone down. Leave aside InvITs. So that's the second impact that happened. Going forward, I believe it is for infrastructure companies which are asset heavy, they're going to choose InvIT as a way to list and monetize portfolio. And as we've already seen announcement from the government themselves, including NHAI, Power Grid, etc., who don't have any choice but to go for public, we'll see public market size growing substantially for InvITs per se. And post those experiences, we believe it will become slightly cheaper for people to come to market and issue units. And I think therefore, long term, we believe public market will thrive more. What can be done is from a SEBI or government perspective, most of the regulations are in place. But what only one thing that if government or SEBI was to consider is to reduce the lot size, or units still trade in lot size even in public market, from 1 lakh to single unit, whether it's REIT or InvIT. I think this will drive maximum amount of liquidity in these products, which effectively also give confidence to domestic institutions as well as foreign institutions to put more capital at play. And that will drive overall a far larger capital mobilization for InvITs, and you'll see more public market participation coming in. So only one thing, bringing down the lot size to single unit, both a REIT or equity or InvIT, would result in a substantial change in this regard.
So thank God there's not a long list of recommendations from the practitioner, but one asked from a policy perspective. I said, one come to you now, Sachin. How have you seen asset classes like these grow perhaps globally? Give us some kind of sense there. In India, we are perhaps at the more nascent stage of it. How have we seen this in the more mature markets?
So globally, we have REITs, and REITs kind of include both the REITs and InvIT that we have in the way in the Indian market. I mean, US started REITs maybe sometime in like late 60s. So it's been there in vogue for almost 50 years. The current valuation market cap of, there are about 200 listed REITs there, and they total more than $1 trillion. So it's a big market there, and it's a very good pension product there as well. In India, generally, people are not really investing directly in REITs yet, maybe, or InvITs as a pension product. It's a good pension product as well, for the reasons that we discussed before. Even in markets like Singapore, Japan, Hong Kong, closer home in Asia, we have also seen fair bit of issuances. And the thing is, and in India, I mean, I am quite sure it's just a matter of time, whether it is 2 years or 5 years or 10 years, it will become, because increasingly we are losing options to invest. There is a whole generation of people who don't have really any solid pension kind of really there. Our parents maybe were more in the government jobs, and they kind of had more stable pensions. Now that is no longer the case. So therefore, and that is where I would add to what Harsh said in terms of what I think the investor education here will be a very, very key thing. People who are aware of it, people who can understand it, they find it a very good instrument. It's just that people, I think, and it's a complex product. Nilesh said it right. So maybe if someone gets it right, he can actually put in larger amounts of money here instead of just putting smaller amounts in, kind of equity, being more opportunistic kind of there. You can actually plan your investments in for a long term, 20, 30 year kind of a thing. But then for that to happen, maybe only the 2 or 3 examples that we have in the public space, we need to have more such examples. IndiGrid has been giving strong distribution and kind of giving at a stable capital price as well. But I think more such examples will kind of give the confidence to the retail guy. He may not really do all the discounted cash flow. He will just see maybe 3 or 4 who are doing well, and then people talking about it, and then he will go for that. That's, I think, the way typically the investments happen. What I'm saying is globally, it's a very well understood, very well penetrated kind of a product, and there's no reason why it shouldn't be kind of there in India as well.
Harsh, you want to add something to what Sachin said?
I had a question for Nilesh actually. So I think, see, in India, what we have seen over the last 20 years is, and gradually it's changing. To say people had only 2 options, or rather 3 options to invest, 4 options to invest in. You have real estate, where there are its own challenges of liquidity, governance, all other issues. Then there is equity and debt. Over a period of time, gold became a good asset class, professionally managed asset class, a relatively easier liquid way to invest in, besides the traditional way. Do you see InvITs and REITs as becoming a material part of the asset allocation, people who focuses asset allocation individually, to earn, as Sachin mentioned, to earn stable income, low volatility and long-term returns? Do you see that becoming a place? Because globally, as Sachin mentioned, it is a largely an HNI or retail play, because they don't have, bank FDs giving them returns, and now India is going there where no returns are getting given by bank FDs. So do you see this becoming an asset class in itself in terms of asset allocation? And what InvITs or REITs or regulators should do to be relevant in that regard?
So Harsh, your point is absolutely valid that today your options are getting limited. And in that kind of options, InvIT will be one which will be most required. It has element of capital appreciation. It has element of safety. It has element of stable return, which is what an investor needs. So when a person is investing in debt, equity, gold, and real estate, what is he trying to do? He's trying to generate stable return which will outperform inflation. And that will come with little bit of capital appreciation, little bit of coupon income. This is what InvIT is already providing. So InvIT is the final solution or final outcome of the asset allocation which investors are doing. But will it get executed in the same fashion? A lot will depend upon how we educate investors. If investors are going to treat this as bank FD plus return, they will be disappointed, because clearly InvIT prices will keep on moving up and down depending upon underlying projects' performance. How do I convince an investor that, let's say, getting 8 to 12% return, some year 8, some year 12, is relatively fine compared to getting 6% return on a consistent basis? As long as we can position this product appropriately with investors, there will be huge market for it. Today, fortunately for us, conditions are developing for growth of InvIT market. Low interest rates on bank FD and small savings instruments and other savings products will create interest. Second, if we can bring this rule of law into the underlying contracts. And third, if we can do education of investors, I think there is a decades of growth in REIT and InvIT market.
Nilesh, so what happens to mutual funds then? How active are mutual funds which control such huge quantum of cash in India? How active they are in the InvIT space, and how can InvIT be perhaps made more popular with them then?
So today, if I dare say, mutual funds have invested in InvIT more on an experimental basis rather than as a part of portfolio allocation. One help which we got from SEBI was that they allowed us to change our asset allocation in favor of InvIT and REIT. When I filed my offer document in late 90s, there was no concept. The concept came, SEBI immediately allowed us to invest. So one big obstacle was removed courtesy SEBI. The second one was now market phenomena, where being an open-ended fund, I needed liquidity so that if there is a redemption pressure at my end, I'm able to sell that paper. Now, liquidity requires size, and liquidity also requires informed investors who can take that decision. Today, we are at a stage where liquidity is there, but it is not that large that mutual funds can take big positions. But between insurance companies, pension funds, mutual funds, banks, and foreign institutional investors, InvIT market can be developed. There will be appetite by retail investors, family offices, and HNIs also about REIT as well as InvIT. The most important thing will be to ensure that secondary market liquidity in REIT and InvIT is created, just like SEBI removed obstacle for mutual fund to invest in REIT and InvIT. As we move on this journey, we'll recognize there is this problem, there is that problem. As long as SEBI is proactive in its approach and providing solution to the satisfaction of the market, the secondary market liquidity will continue to improve. And as liquidity improves, it will continue to attract size.
What happens to the attractiveness of this product at a time when we're talking about, lower interest rate regime? Investors' concerns are coming into the fore. They are showing sort of more attractiveness to roll down products or pension or bonds or things like that. What happens to a product like InvIT in a scenario like this? Because we're supposed to perhaps be in a lower interest rate regime for some time now.
So it's a matter of, I wouldn't like to use a hard word, but today the largest owner of commercial real estate in India is a foreign fund. We were not short of capital. We were short of idea to ensure that we couldn't package those real estate properties and distribute it among Indian investors who were anyway seeking higher return. The same product could have been picked up by banks, insurance companies, mutual funds, pension funds. And yet, in challenging scenario, a foreign investor took the risk and also benefited in becoming the largest owner of commercial real estate in India. How do we ensure that financialization of savings happen? Why did Indian investor not capture that opportunity? These are the issues which we need to solve. We cannot allow a scenario where we get money from foreign investors, which is reflected into our foreign exchange reserve at $513 billion. And we in turn lend that money at 0% or negative interest rate to foreigner. And they continue to get 8 to 10% rental yield from our commercial property and maybe 4 to 5% capital appreciation. This whole trade of paying 12, 13, 15% in rupee and earning zero or negative in dollar will not be good for us. We need to ensure that we are able to financialize India's savings into Indian assets.
I think we just come into the last bits of our conversation. We spoke about quite a few things: asset allocation, how do you pick one InvIT versus the other, difference between InvIT and IPO, what really is InvIT, and I think Nilesh beautifully laid out, how do you grow this market as going forward. My last thoughts, for all three of you, we've had a very meaningful conversation till now. All of you have contributed very significantly to this. I'll sort of perhaps begin with you, Sachin, and then sort of get on to the panelist. Your last thoughts really on the key takeaways, on what is the future of infrastructure investing in India, and could InvIT really be the answer?
Yeah, I would like to say that we don't have a choice. I think we have to necessarily use InvITs as a platform to kind of, whether it's private InvIT or public InvIT, but that is the way forward. And just to give you an example, I mean, we have more than 100 new roads, what we call as HAMs, they are hybrid annuity assets, which are going to be operational in the next 2 years. None of the developers who own these assets today really want to own them. They obviously want to sell it because using that money, they will invest in the new projects. So that is the classic cycle that an infrastructure developer has to run, build the asset, sell it to a investor who can hold it for 15, 20 years, and then using that money, invest in the second round of investment. And which what most of the developers have now understood in India, because there was a round of financial stress which all the infrastructure companies faced. So now when we speak with the developers, they are very clear. They don't want to own an asset which will yield them 10, 12% return. They want to really package it and sell it and then use the money. So therefore, and that is one side, the supply side. And on the demand side, now Nilesh is right. I mean, there could be even foreign investors. Most of the private deals which are happening on the InvIT side are with the foreign this thing, but keeping that foreign and domestic out, I think there is a class of investors. Institutional is mostly foreign and retail will be Indian. But both, as we discussed earlier, both retail and institutional have a fairly good argument to invest in this. So therefore, there is a strong this thing that maybe over the next 2 to 3 years, we will have more and more InvITs which will be funding our infrastructure growth story.
Harsh, on to Nilesh then.
So I think what Nilesh ended with was very true and beautiful. I think no country has grown on foreign capital in terms of infrastructure, and whomsoever has done it has repented in very soon. So I think our ability to channelize Indian savings into Indian asset has to be made right. InvITs has given a first success, I would say, to Ministry of Finance and SEBI. Since the first InvIT got launched in 2017 till now, there's about 1,15,000 crores of assets under management for InvIT in the first 3 years, right? In this stressed environment, there's 1,15,000 crores of assets, 55,000 crores of unit capital is raised and invested across road, tower, fiber, transmission line, and commercial real estate. So it's a phenomenal first success. And I would say this, after mutual fund, this is the first financial success for any new product which SEBI or Government of India launched, right? Whether the IDF and other things kept scratching the surface, I think over here today, they have got a product which has raised a huge amount of capital, trust of most global infrastructure funds and private equity funds to invest and choose as their mode of investment. Part support of Indian institutions. So for example, for us, we have about 7 insurance companies, 4 mutual funds owning our business. So it's a part support, I think, but it's a big success too, that if a new financial product is launched rightly, supported rightly, at the right time, it's going to grow phenomenally. It is, to me, we are at an inflection point of InvITs in infrastructure financing today. With first 3 years, you raise 1 lakh crore in India to put in under InvIT. Where India will need more capital, both domestic and foreign, to be able to channelize in building new infrastructure assets, both in terms of fiscal position and interest rate environment. I think InvITs will play a very material role over the next 5 years to support a meaningful monetization of operating assets and generate large amount of risk capital for Indian infrastructure investment. So that's where I would end. Thanks.
Okay. Nilesh, so what would you conclude on? Future of infrastructure investments, InvITs, could they be the answer? And if at all they could be, what are the right steps in that direction?
If we look at Indian economy as an automobile, we have first gear in terms of debt and we have fifth gear in terms of equity. But in between second, third and fourth gear is missing. Now, can you run a car only in first and fifth gear? For a small patch of road, yes. But in different weather conditions, in different terrain, that will be impossible task. And in some sense, that explains why Indian economy has not grown as fast as some of its Southeast Asian peers or other emerging market. Our savings either move from matrices to bank deposits or straightway to equity market when a pet piper like Harshad Mehta or Ketan Parekh comes in. InvIT, REIT are basically second, third and fourth gear of our economy. It will allow control of Indian economy. It will channelize money moving from matrices to first bank deposits, then to debt-oriented InvITs, then to hybrid InvITs, then to equity-oriented InvITs, and finally to equity. And that smooth change of gear will ensure that Indian economy continues to run at a stable speed and does not overturn. I don't think so. We have to worry about InvIT. We are more worried about India, because without infrastructure, how will we build India? How will we develop India? It is extremely important that in automobile we put mid gears, and InvIT are the mid gears between debt and equity.
I think that's set of a very beautiful end to what all we discussed, and we got the answers to our question also on could InvITs really be the answer for future of infrastructure investing. I think it's time for a rapid fire now. I'll begin with you, Harsh, and then sort of get on to Nilesh, and then Sachin to you. Harsh, what keeps Harsh awake at night?
More assets coming in and policies to enable more monetization of transmission assets.
The highest and lowest point in your career till now?
I would say the highest point was the listing day, because that was almost the first InvIT, and we had worked on that for about 2 years. And I would say it was a culmination of 15 years of dreams for India, where people kept talking about building something in terms of REITs and InvITs. And being there on the first power InvIT was phenomenal experience. I would say that's the highest one. I won't call the lowest one till now, so that's fine. It's been all positive.
Okay. And going forward, if there's one advice for the FM, what would that be?
I think what Nilesh mentioned, I will steal his words. Build second, third, and fourth gear of Indian economy, and you have a lot of decision-making power and wherewithal to make decisions to move the economy, and you have taken the GST demonetization and all other difficult moves. I think the next one needs to come from financial sector in terms of making tough decisions.
Okay, Nilesh, I come to you now. What is the first word that comes to your mind when I say the following? The growing stock market and its increasing disconnectedness with the pandemic.
It's the opportunity to make money and make my clients wealthy by appropriate selection.
If you are stuck in an elevator with Madam Finance Minister, what would be your quick 2-minute pitch to her be?
I will simply say that, ma'am, you have the best possible opportunity of any Indian finance minister to reposition India in this world where there is tremendous goodwill for India because of how things have shaped up in post-COVID-19 era, and there is tremendous suspicion against China. Let's lay out red carpet for investors, domestic as well as foreign, and accelerate India's growth into double digit.
How will 2020 go down in the history?
If we capture the opportunities in front of us, we can all proudly say that, like 1991 era, we lived in 2020, which turned around India's growth trajectory. It changed India's orbit.
Sachin, I come to you now. India versus China infrastructure. Can India really become manufacturing hub and overtake China as it is made out to be?
Why not? I mean, we have certainly the technical skills, the funding, the capability. I think we just need to have a bit more confidence and the support from the government. We can certainly do that.
Who has been your favorite speaker today in this entire conversation?
I like Nilesh. I always like listening to him, and he puts things in a very simple manner and easy for everyone to understand. So I love to hear Nilesh.
But I loved all three of you. It was so much meaningful, and thank you for joining in. And do tune into the second episode of Future of Infrastructure Investing. Till the time we see you next, goodbye and good luck. And do follow all the safety protocols. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.